The first pig stepped onto the polished marble floor at exactly 8:17 in the morning, and the president of the Oak Ridge Estates HOA screamed so loudly that every contractor in the parking lot stopped moving. For 6 months, that building had been advertised as the crown jewel of the neighborhood. $10 million of glass walls, cedar beams, imported stone, a heated pool, a private fitness room, and a grand entrance with the HOA logo carved into limestone. The board called it a legacy project. The residents were told it would raise their property values. The local paper had even written about the luxury clubhouse that would put Oak Ridge Estates on the map. And now, livestock trailers were backing up to the service entrance while black Berkshire pigs snorted their way past the automatic doors. Angela Marsh, the HOA president, came running across the parking lot in white tennis shoes and a navy blazer, her face red, her arms flying, her mouth wide open. Behind her came 2 board members, the clubhouse manager, a construction supervisor, and several residents who looked too stunned to speak. She pointed at the trailers, then at the pigs, then at me. She accused me of trespassing, vandalism, animal cruelty, and destroying HOA property. She said I was finished. She said my farm would be sued out of existence. She said no judge in the county would allow one angry man to turn a $10 million clubhouse into a filthy pig barn. The sheriff's deputy beside me did not move. The county inspector did not move. My attorney did not even look up from the folder in his hands. That was when Angela realized this was not a prank, not a protest, and not some desperate stunt by a bitter neighbor. This was paperwork. This was a court order. This was recorded land history, finally catching up with people who thought money could erase a property line. For years, the HOA had acted like the field behind my house belonged to them because it looked convenient on their brochures. They had paved over the old access road, torn down my grandfather's fence, cut the pecan trees my mother planted, and poured the foundation for their dream clubhouse directly into soil my family had owned for more than a century. They had laughed at my deed. They had ignored my warnings. They had told residents I was trying to extort the community. But that morning, the county survey stakes were already in the ground. Bright orange flags ran across the lawn, around the pool deck, through the parking lot, and straight to the front entrance. Every flag marked the same truth. The clubhouse was not sitting on HOA land. It was sitting on mine. The court had ordered the HOA to stop using the property. The certificate of occupancy had been suspended. The county confirmed my parcel had never been included in the HOA declaration. And because the land was still classified as a grandfathered agricultural parcel, I had done exactly what the HOA never bothered to do. I applied for the proper permits. I passed inspection. I installed the fencing, drainage, feed storage, and waste management setup the county required. Then I brought in the pigs. The first trailer door slammed open. A handler guided the animals down the ramp while Angela stood frozen near the entrance, her jaw shaking. The room where she had planned champagne receptions and board meetings was now being converted into livestock housing under a valid agricultural approval. Angela demanded that the sheriff arrest me. He calmly told her I was the legal property owner. The court order was active, and the HOA had been instructed not to interfere. That was the moment her anger turned into fear, because everyone standing there finally understood the truth. This was never about pigs. This was about a board that spent $10 million building on land it did not own. And the man they had mocked was now the only person with the legal right to decide what happened there next. Before Oak Ridge Estates had stone entrance gates, private security cameras, golf carts, and a $10 million clubhouse, that land was just my family's pasture. My name is Daniel Mercer, and I was born in a small white farmhouse at the edge of what people now call one of the most desirable gated communities in the county. Back then, there were no brick signs, no HOA newsletters, no architectural review committees, and no residents arguing over paint colors or mailbox styles. There was only red clay, pasture grass, pecan trees, a narrow gravel road, and a line of old fence posts my grandfather set by hand before I was old enough to walk. The Mercer land was not impressive to outsiders. It was not a resort. It was not landscaped. It did not have fountains, tennis courts, or walking trails with decorative lights. But to my family, it was everything. My great-grandfather bought the first piece of it with money he earned, repairing farm equipment and hauling timber after the war. He paid taxes on it every year, even during the years when the crops failed and the bank nearly took the house. My grandfather added a few acres later. My father kept the property alive when every developer in the county started knocking on doors and offering checks that sounded big until you realized what they were really buying. They were not just buying land. They were buying history. They were buying the place where my grandmother hung laundry between two cedar posts. They were buying the pecan trees my mother planted after my younger sister was born. They were buying the low ridge where my father taught me how to mend a fence, change a tractor tire, and read a property line from an old deed description that mentioned stones, creeks, and trees instead of neat modern lot numbers. That was the strange thing about our land. It did not fit the new world that grew around it. The newer homes in Oak Ridge Estates had clean parcel maps, glossy brochures, and perfectly measured lots. Our deed was older, written in metes and bounds, tied to markers that had existed long before the subdivision. There was an old stone near the creek, a rusted iron pin at the back corner, and a massive oak tree that had been used as a reference point in county records for generations. I knew those markers because my father made sure I knew them. He told me more than once that a man who does not know his boundaries will eventually meet someone willing to move them for him. At the time, I thought he was only talking about land. After he passed, I stayed in the farmhouse alone. I was not rich. I was not powerful. I repaired equipment, did welding jobs, helped local farms keep their machines running, and lived quietly. I paid my property taxes. I kept the grass cut near the road. I fixed the fence when storms knocked branches down. I let deer cross the back field. I let a few older neighbors walk the edge of the pasture in the evenings because they had done it before the gates went up. What I did not do was join Oak Ridge Estates. I never signed their covenants. I never agreed to their bylaws. I never paid their dues. My house was older than the subdivision, my parcel was separate from the subdivision, and my driveway connected to a county road that existed before the first model home was built. The HOA had no authority over my land, and for a long time that was not a problem. Then Oak Ridge changed. The original developer went bankrupt halfway through the expansion. A new management company came in. The HOA board became more aggressive. Property values went up, and with them came a different kind of attitude. Suddenly, the field behind my house was no longer viewed as an old family parcel. It was viewed as wasted space. Residents started referring to it as the open area behind the pool site, even though there was no pool site. A board member once mentioned it in a meeting as a future community green space. Another resident posted online that the abandoned farm section should be cleaned up because it made the neighborhood look unfinished. Someone from the HOA management office mailed me a warning about weeds, even though their rules did not apply to me, and the grass they were complaining about was pasture grass on agricultural land. At first, I handled it politely. I sent copies of my deed. I emailed the property manager. I explained that my parcel was not part of Oak Ridge Estates and never had been. I attached tax records. I even included an old survey my father had paid for years earlier, with notes showing the boundary line between my land and the subdivision's common area. Nobody apologized. The replies came back cold and careful, written in the kind of language people use when they do not want to admit they are wrong. They claimed the board would review the matter. They claimed there may have been conflicting records. They claimed the HOA had a responsibility to maintain the appearance and value of the community. One email even suggested that because my property was surrounded on 3 sides by Oak Ridge Estates, I should cooperate with community standards for the benefit of everyone. That sentence stayed with me. For the benefit of everyone. It sounded harmless, but underneath it was the same message I would hear, again and again. My ownership mattered less than their image. My family history mattered less than their property values. My deed mattered less than their plans. The first real warning came when Angela Marsh became HOA president. Angela was not the kind of person who raised her voice at first. She was worse than that. She smiled while speaking down to people. She had a way of making an insult sound like advice. She wore expensive athletic clothes to board meetings, posted photos with county officials, and spoke constantly about protecting the prestige of Oak Ridge Estates. Under her, the HOA stopped acting like a neighborhood association and started acting like a small government that had forgotten it was not one. She called my land an eyesore during a public meeting. Not my name, not the Mercer property, an eyesore. A resident sent me the recording later. I listened to it in my kitchen, sitting at the same table where my mother used to sort bills and seed packets. Angela described the back parcel as underutilized land that disrupted the visual flow of the community. She said Oak Ridge needed amenities that reflected the level of investment residents had made. She said the board was exploring options to transform neglected space into something beautiful. She never said she was talking about stealing it, but that was what it felt like. A few weeks later, glossy mailers appeared in residents' mailboxes. They showed renderings of a luxury clubhouse with glass walls, a fitness center, meeting rooms, a resort-style pool, a cafe lounge, and walking paths. The project was described as the future heart of Oak Ridge Estates. The location was shown in soft green shading behind my house, my land, the same land where my father's ashes had been scattered under the pecan trees. The same land where my grandfather's fence still leaned against the wind. The same land my family had refused to sell because some things are worth more than a number on a developer's check. I called the HOA office that day. I sent another email. I attached the deed again. I attached the tax map again. I asked for the legal description of the parcel they intended to build on. I asked for proof that the HOA owned it. I asked for the permit application, the recorded plat, and the survey being used by their contractor. No one answered directly. Instead, I received a formal letter from the HOA's attorney stating that the board believed its development plans were proper and that continued interference could expose me to liability for delay damages. The letter did not prove they owned the land. It did not explain the boundary conflict. It did not address the deed. It simply warned me to stay away from the project area. That was the moment I realized politeness was being mistaken for weakness. Still, I did not want a war. I wanted someone to look at the paperwork and stop before the damage became permanent. I wanted the board to admit there was a problem. I wanted the contractor to pause until a licensed surveyor confirmed the line. I wanted common sense to matter more than pride. But people like Angela do not stop when they think they are winning. They push harder. So while the neighborhood celebrated the future clubhouse, I stood behind my old fence and looked across the pasture my family had protected for more than 100 years. I could already hear machines in the distance. I could already see survey ribbons that I had not authorized. And I had the sick feeling that the HOA was about to learn the difference between land they wanted and land they owned. If you have ever dealt with someone who thought a title, a board position, or a little money gave them the right to step over your property line, you already know how lonely that moment feels. Leave your thoughts in the comments, because some people do not understand boundaries until the law forces them to see one. And in my case, the law was about to arrive too late to stop the first bulldozer, but just in time to make sure everyone responsible paid for what they were about to do. The first construction trailer arrived on a Monday morning while the fog was still sitting low over the pasture. I remember the sound before I saw the truck. It was that deep diesel growl that does not belong on a quiet country road before sunrise. I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of coffee in my hand and watched a white pickup turn off the county road, followed by a flatbed loaded with temporary fencing orange barrels and rolled up erosion control fabric. Behind them came another truck carrying a small bulldozer. For a few seconds, I just stood there, hoping I was wrong. Then the lead pickup stopped beside my old cattle gate, and two men in safety vests got out like they had every right in the world to be there. One of them unfolded a site plan across the hood of the truck. The other walked straight to my fence and tied a strip of bright pink survey ribbon to the top wire. That ribbon was on my side of the line. I walked down from the porch slowly, trying to keep my voice calm before I had even opened my mouth. I had dealt with enough machinery in my life to know that once a crew starts moving dirt, common sense gets buried fast. Permits, deadlines, subcontractors, deliveries, concrete schedules, loan draws, inspection dates. All of it becomes a machine. And if you are standing in front of that machine with nothing but a deed folder and a warning, people treat you like an inconvenience instead of a landowner. The site supervisor barely looked at me when I asked what they were doing. He had a tablet in one hand and a hard hat pushed back on his head. He said the crew was preparing the amenity parcel for Oak Ridge Estates. He said the HOA had approved the work. He said the owner had signed off. He said all permits were in place. I told him there was only one problem. I was the owner. That was the first time I saw the expression I would become very familiar with over the next few months. Not confusion, not concern, annoyance. The kind of annoyance people show when reality interrupts a schedule they have already been paid to follow. He told me I needed to take it up with the HOA. I told him I already had. He told me his company had been given a legal site package. I asked to see it. He said he was not authorized to share internal construction documents with a neighbor. I told him I was not a neighbor to that parcel. I was the landowner. He looked past me toward the field, then back down at his tablet, as if my land could somehow belong to whoever had the cleaner PDF. By 8 o'clock, Angela Marsh arrived. She came in a black SUV with the Oak Ridge Estates decal on the rear window, dressed like she had planned to be photographed. Her sunglasses were too large. Her smile was too tight, and she carried a leather folder against her chest like a shield. 2 board members stepped. Her sunglasses were too large, her smile was too tight, and she carried a leather folder against her chest like a shield. 2 board members stepped out behind her, both looking uncomfortable but not surprised. That told me something important right away. This was not a mistake they had discovered that morning. They had known I would object, and they had come prepared to push through me. Angela did not ask why I was upset. She did not ask to see my deed. She did not suggest pausing until the boundary was confirmed. She positioned herself between me and the crew, lifted her chin, and explained that the board had full authority to proceed with community improvements on the designated amenity parcel. She spoke slowly, as if I were a child having trouble understanding an adult conversation. I told her, the designated amenity parcel did not exist on my deed, on my tax bill, or on the recorded plat I had seen at the county. I told her they were standing on Mercer land. I reminded her that I had sent the records 3 separate times. Her face did not change. She said the HOA had legal counsel. She said the development documents were complicated. She said the board could not allow one non-member property owner to hold an entire neighborhood hostage. Then she said something that told me exactly how this fight was going to go. She said progress always upset people who were attached to the past. Attached to the past, she was standing less than 300 yards from the family cemetery where my father was buried, talking about the past like it was an outdated paint color. I told the contractor not to touch the fence. I told Angela the same thing. I said I would call the sheriff, the county, and an attorney if they crossed that line. Angela gave the smallest shrug, the kind people give when they are confident someone else will absorb the damage. Then she turned to the supervisor and told him to continue with site preparation. By noon, the temporary fencing was up. By sunset, the old gate was blocked. The next morning, the first section of my grandfather's fence was gone. That fence had leaned for years, and I will admit it was not pretty. The cedar posts were gray. The wire had been patched in 3 places, and one corner sagged where a storm had dropped a limb on it the winter before. But my grandfather had built it. My father had repaired it. I had repaired it after him. It marked a line our family had respected for generations, and the HOA treated it like trash in the way of a landscaping upgrade. They did not stack the wood carefully. They did not call me. They did not even leave it near the property line. They dragged the broken posts into a pile beside the access road and ran machinery tracks over the old grass where the fence had stood. I called the sheriff that day. The deputy who came out was polite, but I could see the problem as soon as Angela produced her folder. She had a plat drawing, a project packet, a permit summary, and a letter from the HOA attorney claiming the work area was part of the community's planned common amenities. I had my deed, my tax records, and an old survey copy with handwritten notes from a surveyor who had died 15 years earlier. To me, the truth was obvious. To the deputy, it looked like a civil property dispute wrapped in competing documents. He could not arrest the HOA president for building on land she claimed the HOA controlled. He could not order the contractor to abandon an active permitted site based on a roadside argument. He told everyone to stay calm. He suggested that I take it to the county and get a current survey. Angela stood beside him with that polished expression, acting as if the deputy's inability to settle the issue on the spot was a victory for her. After he left, the work accelerated. They scraped the pasture first. The grass disappeared under steel tracks. The low rise where my father used to park the hay wagon was flattened. Silt fencing went up along the creek bed. Dump trucks brought gravel. Survey stakes appeared in lines that did not match any boundary I had ever known every morning. I woke to the backup alarms of equipment and the metallic clatter of construction panels. I kept walking the edge of the site with my phone in my hand, recording from my side of the temporary fence. The workers started calling me cameraman under their breath. One of the board members told residents online that I was harassing the crew. Angela posted an update to the HOA portal, saying that construction had begun despite unfortunate resistance from an adjacent owner. She made it sound like I was throwing myself in front of progress, because I did not like the view. Then came the trees. My mother's pecan trees stood in a crooked row along the western side of the field. She planted them when my sister was born, and even after my sister moved across the country. Those trees became part of how we measured time. Some years they gave almost nothing. Some years the branches hung heavy. My mother used to collect the pecans in old feed sacks and leave bags of them on neighbors' porches before Oak Ridge Estates ever existed. The contractor cut 5 of them in one morning. I was in town buying hydraulic fluid when it happened. When I came back, the limbs were already stacked, and the trunks were lying in sections beside the dirt access lane. The stumps were pale and raw. Fresh sawdust covered the ground like yellow dust. For a moment, I could not even speak. It felt ridiculous to be that shaken by trees, but anyone who has inherited land knows it is never just trees. It is the hands that planted them. It is the person who is not there anymore to defend them. Angela was at the site that afternoon with a small group of residents, pointing toward the framed outline of what would become the clubhouse lobby. She looked pleased, almost triumphant. When I confronted her about the pecan trees, she did not deny they had been cut. She said the trees were inside the approved construction zone. She said the landscaping plan would include new ornamental plantings. She said the community would look better when the project was complete. New ornamental plantings. That was how she described replacing living family history with decorative shrubs around a pool deck. A week later, the concrete trucks arrived. That was when the whole situation changed from a boundary dispute into something much bigger. Dirt can be moved back. Fences can be rebuilt. Even trees, as painful as it is, can be valued and claimed as damages. But a foundation means commitment. A foundation means contracts, inspections, payments, and people with money on the line pretending harder than ever that they have not made a mistake. I sent one more written warning before they poured. I emailed Angela. The property manager, the construction company, the HOA attorney, and the county permit office. I attached my deed again. I attached the tax parcel map again. I wrote that they were building on private property without permission. I requested an immediate pause until a licensed boundary survey could be completed and ownership verified. No one paused. By Friday afternoon, wet concrete was spreading across my land under the guidance of men with laser levels and rubber boots. Angela stood near the road, with a hard hat she did not need, smiling as if the gray slab being poured was proof that she had won. Residents gathered beyond the safety fence, taking pictures. The HOA posted a celebratory update that evening, saying the foundation for the Oak Ridge Clubhouse had been completed ahead of schedule. My warning email was not mentioned. My deed was not mentioned. The property line was not mentioned. After that, the project moved like a storm. Framing went up. Steel beams arrived. The glass walls were installed. The roof line appeared above the old pasture like something dropped from another world. The building was beautiful in the way expensive things are beautiful when you do not think about what was destroyed underneath them. Cedar beams, stone columns, wide windows facing the creek, a fitness room overlooking the pecan stumps, and a lounge area positioned almost exactly where my father used to stack winter hay. The more they built, the more arrogant the HOA became. They sent me a cease and desist letter accusing me of interfering with contractors. They warned that if I delayed the project, the HOA would pursue damages for increased construction costs. They claimed my repeated presence at the site created a safety hazard. They told me not to approach workers, not to remove barriers, and not to enter the construction zone. The construction zone was on my land. That was the part that made my hands shake. Every time I read one of their letters. They were not only taking the property, they were trying to make me look like the trespasser for standing near it. Residents began treating me differently, too. Some avoided looking at me when they drove by. Others slowed down and stared at my farmhouse, like I was the problem lowering their home values. A man in a golf cart stopped near my mailbox one evening and told me the neighborhood had waited years for this clubhouse, he said. I should be proud. My old field was becoming something useful. He said everyone would benefit if I stopped being difficult. I did not answer him, because by then I understood that Angela had done more than build on my land. She had told a whole community a version of the story where I was greedy, backward, bitter, and unreasonable. She had turned my family property into their dream amenity, and turned me into the villain for objecting. The final insult came 2 weeks before the planned ribbon cutting. I received an envelope from the HOA attorney by certified mail. Inside was a formal demand that I stop making false ownership claims regarding the clubhouse property. The letter accused me of disrupting community operations, damaging the reputation of the board, and attempting to extract payment from the association through baseless threats. It warned that continued interference could result in legal action, seeking injunctive relief and monetary damages. I read that letter twice at my kitchen table. Then I set it beside my father's old deed box. Outside the window, I could see the lights from the almost finished clubhouse glowing across the field. Workers had installed the pool fence that day. The parking lot was striped. The landscaping was going in. Where my mother's pecan trees had stood, there were now young decorative magnolias held upright with green nursery tape. For the first time since the trucks arrived, I stopped trying to convince Angela Marsh to do the right thing. I finally understood that she did not want proof. She did not want fairness. She did not want a boundary confirmed before damage was done. She wanted the building finished so the cost, the politics, and the embarrassment would become so large that she could pressure me to surrender. She thought completion would make her stronger. She thought a $10 million clubhouse would be too expensive for anyone to challenge. She thought I would look at the glass walls, the stone columns, the pool deck, the lawyers, the residents, and the HOA budget, and decide that one man with an old deed could not fight all of that. But Angela had made one mistake. She assumed I had already shown her my strongest evidence. I had not even close. The hardest thing I did during those months was nothing. I do not mean I gave up. I do not mean I accepted what they were doing. I mean I stopped reacting in the way Angela wanted me to react. I stopped walking to the fence every time a truck arrived. I stopped arguing with supervisors who had already been told to treat me like a nuisance. I stopped sending emotional emails that gave the HOA attorney more words to twist. I stopped expecting the people who had ignored 3 warnings, cut down my trees, torn out my fence, and poured concrete on my land to suddenly develop a conscience because I sounded hurt enough. That was not easy. Every morning I could see the clubhouse growing from my kitchen window. I could see workers installing glass walls where pasture used to be. I could hear nail guns, saws, generators, backup alarms, and the steady beep of machines reversing across soil my family had paid taxes on for more than a century. Every sound felt like a hand reaching into my house and dragging another piece of my family history away. But anger was not evidence. My father used to say that a man in a property fight needs fewer speeches and better paper. I had repeated that sentence to myself before, but I had never truly understood it until I was sitting at my kitchen table with the HOA's threat letter on one side and my father's deed box on the other. Angela had lawyers, money, contractors, residents, glossy renderings, and a nearly finished $10 million building. If I wanted to stop her, I needed something stronger than being right. I needed a record so clean. Nobody could pretend not to see it, so I started building one. The first folder was for photographs. I printed every picture I had taken from the day the construction trailers arrived. The pink survey ribbon tied to my fence, the temporary fencing crossing the old pasture line, the bulldozer tracks cutting through grass, the broken cedar posts from my grandfather's fence, the pecan stumps, fresh and pale, with sawdust still scattered around them, the concrete pour, the steel beams, the glass walls, the pool excavation, the parking lot, the landscaping crews planting decorative shrubs where my mother's trees had stood. I did not just save the photos on my phone. I backed them up. I emailed them to myself. I put copies on a hard drive. I wrote dates, times, and locations in a notebook. I marked where I had been standing when I took each one. I made sure every image had context, because a picture without context can become just another thing for lawyers to argue about. The second folder was for communication. Every letter from the HOA went in. Every envelope. Every certified mail receipt. Every email from the property manager. Every warning from the attorney. Every notice claiming I was interfering with community improvements. Every message where they refused to provide proof of ownership. Every update Angela posted to the HOA portal that a resident quietly forwarded to me. The more I read them in order, the clearer the pattern became. They never proved title. They never answered the boundary question. They never showed a recorded deed transferring my land to the HOA. What they did instead was use confident language. Approved project, designated amenity parcel, community benefit, planned common area, adjacent owner resistance, false ownership claims, delay damages. Every phrase was built to make their position sound official without showing the one thing that mattered. Ownership. The third folder was for county records. That was the folder that changed everything. I went to the county clerk's office on a rainy Tuesday morning with my deed box in a canvas bag. The building smelled like old paper, floor wax, and burned coffee. It was not dramatic. There were no shouting attorneys or TV cameras. Just a row of counters, a few public computers, and people waiting to record marriage licenses, probate forms, and real estate documents. But I walked in with the strange feeling that the truth was somewhere in that building, buried under handwriting, stamps, and index numbers. The young clerk at the front desk started with the modern parcel search that gave us the tax map everyone had already seen, but I told her the property was old and that the original description might not be fully linked to the digital system. She called over an older clerk named Mrs. Harlan, who had worked there long enough to remember when records were still pulled by hand. Mrs. Harlan looked at the names in my deed chain, then looked at me a little differently. She said the Mercer tract had old references that might be in the archived books, not just the computer. Then she took me to a side room where the air felt cooler, and the shelves held the kind of records nobody touches unless something has gone badly wrong. Big leather-bound books, microfilm drawers, plat cabinets, index cards with fading ink, the past stacked in rows. For almost 3 hours we traced the land backward, my father's deed, my grandfather's deed, the probate transfer after my great-grandfather died, the original purchase, a right-of-way note from the 1930s, tax receipts, a partial survey from the 1960s, a condemnation map from when the county road was widened. None of it showed a sale to the developer. None of it showed a transfer to Oak Ridge Estates. None of it showed a dedication of my parcel as common area. Then Mrs. Harlan pulled the subdivision plat. That was the first time I saw exactly how the mistake had been hidden in plain sight. The recorded plat for Oak Ridge Estates showed the subdivision wrapping around my property. The lots stopped at my boundary. The common areas stopped at my boundary. The drainage easements stopped at my boundary. There was no amenity parcel on my land. There was no clubhouse site. There was only my tract, labeled separately, outside the subdivision. But the glossy map the HOA had been using told a different story. It looked similar enough to fool people who wanted to be fooled. Same streets, same ponds, same lot shapes, same green shading. But behind my house, where the recorded plat clearly preserved the Mercer tract, the marketing version showed a shaded block marked as future recreation area. It was not a legal document. It was a sales map, a brochure, a promise made to buyers by a developer who apparently thought my father would eventually sell. My father never did. I paid for certified copies of everything. The recorded plat, the deed chain, the tax history, the parcel map, the old right-of-way notes, the probate record. Anything with a stamp, a book number, a page number, or a signature went into the folder. When I left the clerk's office, I had less money in my checking account and more peace in my chest than I had felt in months. But certified copies were only one piece. I needed a current survey. The first survey company I called said they were booked out for weeks. The second one asked who the dispute was with. And when I said Oak Ridge Estates, the man on the phone got quiet in a way I did not like. The third company gave me an appointment with a licensed surveyor named Paul Whitetaker, who had been doing boundary work in the county for 30 years and sounded deeply unimpressed by HOAs in general. Paul came out the following Monday with 2 crew members, GPS equipment, metal detectors, flagging tape, and a truck full of stakes. He did not care about Angela's brochure. He did not care about the clubhouse renderings. He did not care about what residents had been promised. He cared about deed calls, monuments, bearings, distances, and whether the physical evidence on the ground matched the legal description. Watching him work was the first time I felt the ground under my feet become solid again. He found the old iron pin near the western corner, buried under leaves and clay. He found the stone marker near the creek, tilted but still there. He found remnants of the old fence line, not where the HOA's construction fence stood, but exactly where my father had always said the boundary ran. He compared the old meets and bounds description to modern GPS coordinates. He checked the subdivision plat against my deed. He took measurements from the county road. He walked the line slowly, patiently, like a man listening to the land itself testify. The HOA noticed by lunchtime. Angela arrived in her SUV, while Paul's crew was setting flags near the new parking lot. She did not come alone. She brought the construction supervisor, a board member, and a man I recognized from the management company. They stood near the temporary fence, watching Paul through narrowed eyes. Angela asked what authority he had to be there. Paul told her he had been hired by the record owner of the parcel. She said the HOA disputed that claim. Paul shrugged and went back to work. That shrug was worth every dollar I paid him. 2 days later, Paul called and asked me to come to his office. He had the preliminary survey spread across a large table. I remember staring at the lines, trying to make sense of what my eyes were seeing, even though my stomach already understood. The clubhouse was not barely over the line. It was not a few feet into disputed ground. It was not an honest corner mistake that could be fixed with a small easement payment and an apology. The main building sat almost entirely inside the Mercer tract. The pool was inside the Mercer tract. Most of the parking lot was inside the Mercer tract. The service entrance, trash enclosure, equipment pad, and part of the landscaped walking path were all inside the Mercer tract. The HOA had not clipped my boundary. They had built their crown jewel in the middle of my land. Paul's final report included a sealed survey, coordinate data, boundary notes, photographs of recovered monuments, and an overlay comparing the recorded plat with the construction site plan. That overlay was brutal. It showed the legal reality in black lines and the HOA's fantasy in bright color. Anyone could understand it in 5 seconds. The fourth folder was for permits. I went to the county building department and requested the permit file for the clubhouse. That request made people uncomfortable, not rude. Exactly. But careful, the clerk asked if I was affiliated with the project. I said I was the owner of the land under the project. That sentence changed the room. The permit file was thick: site plans, engineering sheets, drainage calculations, contractor licenses, inspection notes, environmental forms, owner authorization paperwork. And there, in the application packet, was the part my attorney would later call the thread that unraveled the sweater. The HOA had signed as the owner's authorized representative, but the parcel number listed in the file did not match my tax parcel. The legal description attached to the application was vague. The site plan appeared to use the developer's unrecorded amenity map instead of the final recorded plat, somewhere between the HOA board, the architect, the contractor, and the permit office. Everyone had acted as if the land problem had already been solved. It had not. I requested copies of the permit application, the ownership certification, the site plan, the inspection approvals, and the correspondence between the applicant and the county. I also asked whether a certificate of occupancy had been issued. It had not. The building was close to completion, but not officially approved for use that mattered. The fifth folder was for money. I pulled property tax records showing my family had paid taxes on the tract every year. I gathered old receipts my father had kept in envelopes. I requested a tax payment history from the county. I found insurance documents for the farmhouse and acreage. I found a farm use classification letter from years earlier. I found the agricultural assessment paperwork that had seemed boring when my father explained it to me, but now felt like a key hidden in plain sight. The land had never been abandoned. It had never been absorbed. It had never been donated. It had never been transferred into common area. It had simply been treated by the HOA as if old land owned by a quiet family could be overwritten by new money and confident assumptions. By then, my kitchen table had become a war room. Folders were stacked by category. Sticky notes covered the edges. A timeline stretched across 3 legal pads. On one wall, I taped copies of the recorded plat, the HOA's marketing map, and Paul's survey overlay. Seeing them side by side made the whole story obvious. The legal map protected my land. The sales map erased it. Angela built from the erasure. That was when I finally hired an attorney. His name was Raymond Cole, and he specialized in real estate litigation, boundary disputes, and construction claims. I brought him 2 banker's boxes of documents, expecting him to tell me it was messy, expensive, and uncertain. Instead, he spent 20 minutes flipping through the survey, the recorded plat, the permit file, and the HOA letters, then leaned back in his chair with the look of a man who had just found a loaded trap sitting in the open. He said the HOA had a serious problem. Not a public relations problem. Not a neighbor complaint. A legal problem. They had continued construction after written notice of an ownership dispute. They had used an unrecorded or inaccurate map to support a major construction project. They had represented authority over land they did not appear to own. They had removed fencing, cut trees, graded soil, poured concrete, and improved private property without permission. And if the board had been warned internally, as some of the forwarded HOA messages suggested, the situation could become even worse for them. Raymond told me not to contact Angela directly anymore. Not by phone, not by email, not at the fence. Every communication would go through his office. He also told me not to touch the clubhouse, not to block access, not to confront workers, and not to give the HOA any excuse to make me look unstable. The strength of my case was that I had stayed lawful while they kept crossing lines. So we prepared a demand letter. It was not emotional. It did not mention my mother's trees except as documented damages. It did not call Angela a liar. It did not accuse anyone of crimes. It simply laid out the facts like bricks in a wall. Deed history, tax records, recorded plat, sealed survey, permit concerns, prior notice property damage, continued unauthorized use, demand to cease construction activity, demand to preserve all documents, demand to suspend the clubhouse opening, demand for insurance information, demand for board meeting minutes, contractor communications, title review, and any legal opinion the HOA had relied on. Raymond sent it by certified mail and email to the HOA, the management company, the contractor, the architect, the HOA attorney, the county building department, and the HOA-S insurance carrier. Then we waited. Not for long. Within 48 hours, the contractor stopped returning Angela's calls in front of residents. The county building department requested additional ownership documentation. The insurance carrier acknowledged receipt. A board member I had never spoken to before drove slowly past my house, looking pale, the HOA portal, which had been full of clubhouse excitement for months, suddenly went quiet. Angela did not. She called an emergency executive session. A resident forwarded me the notice. The subject line mentioned pending legal matters for the first time. The HOA was not calling me unreasonable, bitter, or confused. They were calling me a claimant. That may not sound like much, but after months of being treated like a trespasser on my own land, it felt like the first crack in the wall. Still, Raymond warned me not to celebrate. Powerful people do not usually admit they are wrong when the truth first appears. They test it. They minimize it. They blame someone else. They offer insulting settlements. They look for technicalities. They hope fear will do what facts cannot. He was right. A week after the demand letter went out, the HOA-S attorney responded with 12 pages of polished denial. They claimed the issue was based on historical ambiguity. They claimed the HOA had relied in good faith on developer documents. They claimed my survey was merely one interpretation. They denied willful trespass. They denied liability for the trees. They denied that the clubhouse opening needed to be suspended. Then, near the end, they offered to discuss a possible access agreement for a modest annual fee. A modest annual fee. They had built a $10 million clubhouse on my land and wanted to rent the ground underneath it for less than some residents paid each year in landscaping dues. Raymond smiled when he read it, but not because it was funny. He said desperate letters often wear expensive suits. That afternoon, we filed for an injunction. And the moment that filing hit the court record, the fight stopped being a neighborhood argument. It became a case number. It became exhibits. It became sworn statements. It became something Angela could not delete from the HOA portal or explain away with a confident smile at a board meeting. For the first time in months, I slept through the night, not because it was over, because I finally knew exactly where the next blow would land. The injunction hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and Angela Marsh walked into the courthouse like she was arriving at another HOA meeting. That was the first sign she still did not understand what had changed. At board meetings, Angela controlled the room. She controlled the agenda, the microphone, the timing, and the little pauses where people were supposed to feel embarrassed for questioning her. In that world, confidence looked like authority. A courthouse was different. In a courthouse, confidence had to stand beside exhibits. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Raymond Cole, my attorney, while the HOA-S legal team spread binders across the defense table. Behind them sat Angela, 2 board members, a management company representative, and a construction supervisor who looked like he had not slept well. I did not bring a crowd. I did not bring signs. I brought 2 banker boxes of records and a surveyor who had measured every foot of the land they had tried to turn into their legacy. The HOA-S attorney tried to make everything sound complicated. He talked about historical development records, good faith reliance, ambiguous planning documents, and the importance of the clubhouse to hundreds of homeowners. He argued that the HOA had already invested millions of dollars, and that stopping the project would harm the community. Then, he said any land dispute could be resolved later through compensation. That was when I knew their position had shifted. They were no longer saying the land was definitely theirs. They were saying the building was too expensive to stop. Raymond did not raise his voice. He simply began laying out the chain of ownership. The original deed from 1919, the probate transfer after my great-grandfather died, my grandfather's recorded deed, my father's recorded deed, my deed, the tax records, the farm use classification, the recorded subdivision plat, the HOA declaration, the sealed survey overlay. One document after another, each one quieter than the last, each one heavier than anything Angela had ever said into a microphone. The recorded plat was the first blow. On the screen, the official subdivision map showed Oak Ridge estates wrapping around the Mercer tract like water around a stone. The lots stopped at the boundary. The common area stopped at the boundary. The drainage easement stopped at the boundary. The HOA's own declaration described the property under its control, and my parcel was not in it. Then Raymond showed the HOA's Clubhouse brochure. It looked similar enough to fool people who wanted to be fooled. Same streets, same ponds, same decorative green shading. But where the official plat preserved my family's land, the brochure showed a future recreation area. No recording stamp, no book number, no county approval, no legal description. Just a sales image from a developer who had never owned what he was promising. The courtroom became very still. Then, Paul Whitaker, the surveyor, explained how he had located the old monuments, checked the deed calls, compared the modern GPS data with the recorded plat, and confirmed the boundary. He did not speak dramatically. He did not need to. The clubhouse was not a few feet over the line. It was not a harmless mistake near an old fence. The main building sat inside the Mercer tract. The pool sat inside the Mercer tract, the service drive, equipment pad, trash enclosure, and most of the parking lot sat inside the Mercer tract. The judge asked the HOA's attorney whether they had a deed showing ownership of the land under the building. The attorney did not answer quickly. He mentioned developer materials, project history, and documents relied upon by the board, but he did not produce a recorded deed. He did not produce a signed easement. He did not produce a sale contract. He did not produce any legal dedication of my parcel as common area. Raymond let the silence do part of the work. Then came the permit file in the building permit application. The HOA had represented that it had authority to develop the site. Someone had signed as owner or owner's authorized agent. But the parcel reference did not match the land actually being built on, and the site plan appeared to rely on the developer's unrecorded amenity map instead of the final recorded plat. The county had issued permits based on what the applicant submitted. The applicant had submitted paperwork claiming authority it could not prove. For the first time that morning, the construction supervisor leaned forward and whispered to the HOA attorney. The management company representative stared down at the table. One board member closed his eyes. Angela kept her face still, but her hands were locked together so tightly her knuckles had gone white. The legal twist was not only that the HOA had built on my land, it was that they had built there after being warned. Raymond introduced my emails, the ones I sent before the fence came down, the ones I sent before the trees were cut, the one I sent before concrete was poured. Each email included my deed or tax map. Each one asked for proof of HOA ownership. Each one requested a pause until the boundary could be confirmed. The HOA tried to call them informal complaints from an adjacent owner. Raymond showed the certified mail receipts. The tone in the courtroom changed again. This was not confusion anymore. This was notice. Angela had not made one innocent mistake and discovered it too late. The HOA had been warned repeatedly that there was a boundary and ownership problem. They could have paused, verified title, ordered a current survey, or gone to court before building. Instead, they moved faster. They removed my fence. They cut my trees. They poured concrete. They finished the building. Then they tried to use the size and cost of their own mistake as leverage against me. For months, Angela had acted like the clubhouse itself was her shield. $10 million was supposed to make my deed look small. The pool, the glass walls, the stone columns, the ribbon-cutting invitations, the angry residents, the sunk costs. All of it was supposed to create pressure, but the judge did not ask who had spent more money. The judge asked who owned the land. The next blow came from the HOA's own internal emails. Months before construction began, the treasurer had asked whether the amenity parcel had been confirmed against the final recorded plat, because the Mercer boundary did not appear to match the developer S sales map. He had attached a county GSE screenshot and asked whether outside counsel should verify title before the board approved the construction contract. Angela had replied that the project had already been delayed enough and that reopening ownership questions would create unnecessary confusion. Another board member had asked whether the Mercer family still paid taxes on that tract. No one followed up. No one ordered a title report for my parcel. No one contacted me with a serious boundary proposal. Instead, the board voted to proceed. Raymond did not need to call Angela reckless. Her own email did it for him. The judge did not decide final damages that morning, but he issued the order that cracked Oak Ridge Estates in half. The HOA was prohibited from opening or using the clubhouse. The county was notified that the certificate of occupancy should not be issued while ownership remained unresolved. The board was ordered to preserve all communications, contracts, title documents, permit applications, insurance correspondence, and meeting records related to the project. Most importantly, the court recognized that I had shown a strong likelihood of ownership over the land beneath the structure. Strong likelihood. It sounded calm, almost boring to Angela. It was a disaster. Because from that moment forward, I was no longer the bitter neighbor making false claims. I was the landowner with a court order. The HOA was no longer the victim of obstruction. It was the association that had spent millions improving property it could not prove it owned. The same afternoon, the county building department placed a hold on the clubhouse file. No certificate of occupancy, no opening event, no public use. The health department suspended review of the pool facility. The fire marshal would not finalize assembly approval. The insurance carrier sent the HOA a reservation of rights letter, which Raymond explained was a polite way of saying they might not cover the disaster if the board had misrepresented material facts. Then the contractor sent its own letter. That was when Angela S. Circle started turning on itself. The contractor claimed it had relied on information provided by the HOA, the architect, and the management company. The architect claimed it had relied on the client S's representations. The management company claimed it had only carried out board decisions. Everyone who had stood together while my fence was torn down suddenly wanted a separate chair when the paperwork turned toxic. But the biggest surprise came 2 weeks later, when Raymond called me into his office with a county zoning file open on his desk. My parcel had never been absorbed into the subdivision. It had never been subjected to the HOA declaration. It had never been rezoned as part of the planned residential development. It remained a legacy agricultural residential tract with grandfathered farm use under county code. Livestock, agricultural storage, and farm structures were allowed if setback, sanitation, drainage, fencing, and animal welfare requirements were met. The clubhouse, if it remained on my land, did not have to remain a clubhouse. It could become something else. At first, I thought Raymond was making a dry legal point. Then he tapped the zoning section with his pen, agricultural shelter, feed storage, equipment storage, livestock housing. I stared at the page. Angela had spent months treating my old farm as an ugly leftover that needed to be absorbed into her perfect community. But legally, the opposite was true. Her luxury clubhouse was the stranger on my farm. Her HOA rules were the paperwork that did not belong. Raymond warned me not to rush. I needed court permission, county approval, inspections, fencing, sanitation planning, and written guidance before anything happened. The point was not to act wild. The point was to be more lawful than they had been at every step. So we prepared. I contacted the county zoning office about agricultural use of an existing structure. I spoke with the health department about waste management. I spoke with a fencing company about livestock containment. I spoke with a local farmer who raised Berkshire pigs and needed winter housing after one of his barns was damaged in a storm. Every call became a note. Every answer became an email. Every step became a record. When Raymond filed the motion asking for limited access to secure the property and prepare it for lawful agricultural use, the HOA reacted like we had suggested burning the building down. They called it spiteful. They called it outrageous. They said turning a luxury clubhouse into agricultural space would damage the image of the community. Raymond's response was simple. The community's image was not a property right. The HOA had no certificate of occupancy. The building sat on land they could not prove they owned. My parcel allowed agricultural use, and the HOA had created the problem by building first and verifying ownership later. The judge did not give me everything at once, but he gave me enough. He ordered that the HOA could not interfere with county inspections on my parcel. He allowed limited access for assessment, fencing, securing the property, and preparation for lawful use, subject to county approval. He made clear that nothing gave the HOA authority to operate the clubhouse. Angela's last shield had fallen. She could not open the clubhouse. She could not call me a trespasser. She could not hide behind HOA rules. She could not stop the county from reviewing agricultural use on my land. And she could not explain to residents why the project she had called her legacy was now legally closer to a farm structure than a neighborhood amenity. By the end of that week, the county had scheduled the inspection that would decide whether Angela's clubhouse could be prepared for agricultural use. The farmer with the Berkshire pigs was waiting for my call. The fencing company had materials ready. The waste management plan was under review. Angela had spent months proving what happens when people rush forward because they think power protects them. I was going to prove what happens when someone follows the law so carefully that the law has no choice but to stand beside him. The county inspection was scheduled for 9 in the morning, but the vehicles started arriving before 8. First came Paul Whitaker's survey truck. Then a white county SUV with the building department seal on the door. Behind it came code enforcement, the health department, and a sheriff's cruiser that parked near the entrance without flashing lights. My attorney, Raymond Cole, arrived last, carrying one folder instead of 2 Banker S boxes, because by then the truth was simple enough to fit inside a judge's order. The clubhouse still looked expensive from a distance. Glass walls, stone columns, cedar beams, fresh landscaping, and a pool deck that had never hosted a single resident. But up close, the illusion was gone. Orange survey flags cut through the lawn like stitches. Temporary fencing blocked the front entrance. A county notice was taped to the glass. The parking lot was empty except for officials, lawyers, and people who suddenly understood that the most beautiful building in Oak Ridge Estates had become the most dangerous file in the county. Angela Marsh arrived late in her black SUV. For several seconds, she sat behind the windshield while 2 board members waited outside, both looking like they wanted to disappear. When she finally stepped out, she wore the same polished clothes and stiff expression she used at HOA meetings. But this time, there was no microphone for her to control, no agenda to manipulate, and no room full of residents trained to mistake confidence for truth. The surveyors went first. They checked the old monuments, the deed calls, the recovered fence line, and the sealed survey overlay. Nobody asked Angela what she believed the line should be. Nobody asked what residents had been promised. The only question was where the legal boundary ran. And the flags answered without emotion. The line ran through the landscaping, along the parking lot, past the service entrance, and around the clubhouse itself. The building Angela called a community amenity was sitting inside the Mercer tract. The sheriff's deputy stood nearby, quiet and watchful. For months, Angela had implied I was the trespasser. She had called me disruptive, unreasonable, and dangerous to the project. But now the deputy's presence protected my right to be on my own land. That single fact drained the power out of her performance. Then the building inspector opened the permit file on the hood of his SUV. He compared the application, owner authorization, site plan, parcel reference, inspection history, and court order. He photographed the posted notice and confirmed that the certificate of occupancy had never been issued. The clubhouse was not legally open. It had never been legally open. The grand ribbon cutting was no longer delayed because of bad publicity. It was blocked because the HOA could not prove it owned the land under the building. Code enforcement documented the site next. They photographed the grading, drainage structures, equipment pad, dumpster enclosure, pool barriers, and fencing. Every picture became part of the file. Every mismatch became part of the file. Every quiet note on a clipboard made the HOA's problem harder to deny. The health department representative walked the areas I planned to convert for agricultural storage and temporary livestock housing. That was when Angela finally lost some of her control. She objected to livestock near what she called a residential amenity. But the county did not care about branding. They cared about containment. Drainage, sanitation, feed storage, animal welfare, waste removal, and setbacks. That was the difference between image and law. Angela had built an image. The county was checking the law. My fencing contractor arrived before noon and marked where the livestock fencing would go if final approval came through. He pointed out gate locations, containment zones, waste pickup access, and barriers needed to keep animals away from the pool and mechanical systems. Nothing was improvised. Nothing was hidden. Nothing was reckless. Every step was documented, inspected, and slower than anger would have liked. That made it worse for Angela. She could not say I was sneaking pigs into the clubhouse in the middle of the night. She could not say I was destroying community property. She could not say I was acting outside the system. The system was standing there with clipboards, cameras, maps, and county vehicles. Then the insurance adjuster arrived. That was when the board members began to look truly frightened. Until that moment, the disaster had been legal and political. Insurance made it financial. The adjuster reviewed the court order, photographed the building, and took notes while Raymond explained the timeline. Warnings before demolition, warnings before tree removal, warnings before concrete, and continued construction after notice. Insurance companies do not like surprises. They especially do not like multi-million-dollar projects built on land their insured may not have had authority to use. By mid-afternoon, residents began gathering near the road. Some looked angry at me, some looked confused, but many were staring at the HOA board with the expression people get when they realize the bill for someone else, as arrogance may land in their mailbox. That evening, the emergency HOA meeting was packed. I did not attend because I was not a member, but a resident sent Raymond the recording. Angela tried to describe the situation as an ongoing legal dispute with an adjacent landowner. But residents had already seen the county vehicles, the survey flags, the sheriff, and the notice on the clubhouse door. They wanted numbers. They wanted to know who approved construction before title was verified. They wanted to know whether insurance would cover the claim. They wanted to know whether a special assessment was coming. For the first time, Angela had to face a room she could not control. The next morning, the county issued written findings. The certificate of occupancy remained on hold. Additional permit review was required. Code enforcement opened a separate file. The health department provided conditions for agricultural use. The sheriff's office confirmed it would enforce the court order if the HOA interfered with lawful access. The language was dry. The impact was not. The clubhouse was frozen. The HOA was exposed. The contractor was distancing itself. The insurance carrier was investigating, and I was no longer standing alone at a fence with a deed in my hand. I had a sealed survey, a court order, county records, inspection notes, and agencies that now had their own reasons to demand answers. A week later, agricultural use approval came through with conditions. I had to install proper livestock fencing, secure the pool and mechanical rooms, maintain waste collection through a licensed service, protect drainage areas, store feed only in approved zones, and allow follow-up inspections. It was not a blank check. It was exactly what I wanted, lawful documented. Impossible for Angela to dismiss as vandalism. The fencing went up first. Real fencing, strong posts, reinforced gates, containment panels, and bright warning signs. The service entrance became the controlled agricultural access point. Straw was delivered. Feed bins were installed. The waste management company placed sealed containers exactly where the county allowed them. Angela drove by twice during the work. She did not stop. On the morning the final inspection was signed, the farmer with the Berkshire pigs called to confirm transport. Raymond reminded me to keep the court order, county approval, inspection sign-off, livestock plan, and sheriff-ass contact information on site. I placed everything in a clean folder on the passenger seat of my truck. Then I drove to the clubhouse before sunrise. The building was silent. No residents, no champagne tables, no yoga mats, no grand opening banner, just glass walls reflecting the gray morning and survey flags trembling in the grass. For a moment I thought about my father walking that field with one hand resting on the fence. I thought about my mother, gathering pecans in old feed sacks. I thought about Angela calling the land neglected and underutilized. Then the first livestock trailer turned off the county road. By the time Angela Marsh arrived screaming, everything that mattered had already been decided by people with stamps, signatures, clipboards, and court authority. The HOA had spent $10 million trying to make my land look like theirs. The county had just helped me prove it was still mine. By the time the second livestock trailer pulled up to the service entrance, Angela Marsh was no longer screaming like a president protecting a community asset. She was screaming like a person watching the truth become impossible to hide. The Sheriff-S deputy stood between her and the entrance, while the Farmer-S crew unloaded the Berkshire pigs one by one. The animals moved slowly down the ramp, snorting into the morning air, their hooves clicking against the concrete, where HOA board members had once planned to roll out a red carpet. Fresh straw had already been laid inside the approved containment area. Feed bins were sealed. Waste containers were labeled. The fencing had passed inspection. The county paperwork was in my truck, clean, signed, copied, and ready for anyone who wanted to pretend this was vandalism. Angela tried anyway. She called it destruction. She called it humiliation. She called it an attack on every family in Oak Ridge Estates. But nobody with authority repeated her words. The inspector checked the site. The deputy checked the court order. My attorney checked the access log. The farmer checked the gates. I stood near the same patch of ground where my grandfather's fence had been torn out, and watched the clubhouse finally become what the law allowed it to become, not an HOA amenity, not a luxury community center, a farm structure on Mercer land. The image spread through Oak Ridge Estates before lunch. Someone took pictures from the road. Someone else posted video of pigs walking past the glass lobby. By evening, the story had moved beyond the subdivision. The local paper that had once praised the $10 million clubhouse ran a new article about a suspended HOA project, a disputed title, and a court order recognizing my family's ownership claim. They did not need to make the story sound dramatic. The facts did that by themselves. A clubhouse built on ancestral land, a board warned before construction, a deed ignored, a survey confirmed, a luxury building converted to agricultural use under county approval. Within a week, Angela's support collapsed. The residents were furious, but not for the reason she expected. Some were angry at me. At first, they hated the smell of straw, hated the sight of livestock trailers, hated that their promised amenity had become a county-approved embarrassment. But anger has a way of changing direction when invoices appear. When the HOA disclosed the legal bills, the permit problems, the insurance uncertainty, and the possibility of a special assessment, people stopped asking why I had fought back and started asking why their board had gambled $10 million on land. It did not own. The emergency meetings became ugly. Residents demanded the title review. Angela claimed had been completed. It did not exist in the way she had suggested. They demanded the legal opinion that supposedly cleared construction. It turned out to be limited, cautious, and based on documents the board had provided. They demanded to know why my warning emails had never been shared honestly with the community. They demanded to know why the treasurer's concern about the recorded plat had been brushed aside. Angela tried to blame the developer, then the contractor, then the management company, then county permitting, then me. But blaming everyone only made the pattern clearer. The board had been warned. The board had rushed. The board had chosen image over title, pride over caution, and pressure over property rights. The contractor settled first. Their insurance carrier did not want a long fight over why nobody had verified the land before pouring concrete. The management company followed with its own contribution. The HOA's insurer fought harder, but the reservation of rights letter gave them leverage against the board. Eventually, after months of filings, negotiations, and expert reports, the settlement came together. The HOA agreed to compensate me for the unauthorized use of my land, damage to the fence, grading, soil disturbance, legal fees, survey costs, and the destruction of my mother's pecan trees. The number was not small. It was large enough that Oak Ridge Estates had to delay 2 other projects, raise dues, and explain to every resident why Arrogance had become an expense line. The clubhouse never opened as a clubhouse. The court gave the HOA a choice: negotiate a lawful purchase or long-term lease at a real market rate with damages included, or remove the portions of the project that interfered with my land use. By then, their leverage was gone. The building had no valid public use approval, no clean ownership path, and no easy way to erase the embarrassment. They could not bully me anymore, and they could not afford to pretend the problem was just public relations. Angela was removed from the board in a vote that was not even close at her last meeting. Residents who once applauded her vision sat with folded arms while the new acting president read through the financial impact. Legal expenses, settlement costs, increased insurance premiums, engineering reviews, permit corrections, potential demolition reserves. Nobody mentioned legacy. Nobody mentioned prestige. Nobody mentioned the future heart of Oak Ridge Estates. The only phrase that mattered anymore was failure to verify title. For a while, I kept the pigs there. Not forever. Long enough. Long enough for every resident who drove past that glass building to understand what had happened. Long enough for every board member in the county to hear the story. Long enough for Angela Marsh's $10 million monument to pride to smell like straw, feed, and consequences. And the strange thing was, once the anger faded, the land felt quiet again. The pigs were eventually moved back to the Farmer S. repaired barn. The county required additional cleanup and follow-up inspections, and I followed every rule. Part of the structure was later converted into lawful agricultural storage. Part of the parking area was removed. The pool was drained, secured, and eventually filled in after the HOA paid for the work. I replanted pecan trees along the western edge of the field, not because new trees could replace my mother S., but because leaving that ground empty would have felt like letting Angela have the final word. She did not get the final word. The land did. My great-grandfather deed survived the developer brochure. My father's refusal to sell survived the HOA's pressure. My mother's trees became part of the damages record. My grandfather's fence line became part of the survey. Every old document they had laughed at became another nail in the case against them. People sometimes ask whether turning the clubhouse into a pig barn was revenge. I understand why it looked that way. But the truth is, revenge would have been sneaking in at night, breaking windows, cutting wires, or doing something stupid because anger felt good for 5 minutes. I did none of that. I waited. I documented. I hired a surveyor. I went to the county. I hired an attorney. I followed the court order. I got inspections. I asked for written approval. I did everything the slow, frustrating, legal way. The pigs were not revenge. They were proof. Proof that land does not belong to whoever has the nicest rendering. Proof that an HOA board is not a government. Proof that confidence is not ownership. Proof that a property line still matters, even when someone pours $10 million of concrete across it. So if you ever find yourself facing a neighbor, a contractor, a developer, or an HOA that thinks your silence means surrender, remember what saved me. It was not yelling. It was not threats. It was not trying to be louder than Angela Marsh. It was the deed. It was the survey. It was the tax record. It was every photograph, every email, every certified letter, every county stamp, and every moment I chose patience over panic. If this story made you think about your own property, your own boundaries, or the people who act like rules only apply when rules protect them, leave your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to check their paperwork before they give up. And subscribe if you want more stories where ordinary people do not win because they are powerful, but because they keep the evidence, learn the law, and refuse to let anyone move the line that protects what is theirs.